Good evening, I'm Barkha Dutt and you're watching The Mojo Story, our independent digital platform that looks at the big stories every day and takes an in-depth look at what the news is behind the headlines. On the program today, we try and make sense of the new OCI rules, the new rules for overseas citizens of India. Now, while these are guidelines, they now have the force of law, and what stands out is that special permissions are going to be needed for research and journalistic activities, missionary activities, tablighi activities, and mountaineering. Now, if that sounds like a rather motley combination, it is, but we will try and make sense of what those four categories are in this special broadcast, which is seeing other changes as well to the OCI rules, including bringing them at par in certain areas with NRIs, and in other cases, deeming them to be foreign nationals. So there are many different kinds of changes. You can see some of them on your screen, but the one that has really grabbed the headlines, of course, is one, that they will now have eligibility in all India entrance exams against NRI seats. The other, that they have been, the nomenclature used for them is foreign nationals. And the fourth, of course, that they will need prior permission if they would like to undertake missionary, tablighi, journalistic research, or mountaineering. It's a really sort of, at one first glance, seems like a random collection of activities. Why is it sparking debate at all? Remember, the government is actually saying that many of these guidelines have existed since the 90s. Let me introduce our guests on the program today. We have General Dhruv Katoch, who of course is, apart from being a senior retired officer of the Indian Army, is with the India Foundation. We are joined also by Ujjwal Deepak, who's a public policy expert. Welcome. We have Atish Taseer, who had his overseas citizenship taken away from him on allegations of having a Pakistani connection, which he has denied, and he's contesting that. And we're also joined by Girish Chandorkar of the Indian National Congress, who's been protesting these new guidelines, and Suhasini Haidar, senior journalist with The Hindu, is with us as well. Let me start with you, Atish, if I may, because this might feel quite personal to you, with your OCI kind of effectively taken away and you're being pushed into exile in New York. But what leaps out at this? Because, you know, the government is saying that many of these are not new features. They are simply old guidelines that have now been, in a sense, put into one consolidated notification and be given the force of law.
So Barkha, yeah, they're not new, and I remember being puzzled by them when I first saw them, but obviously their enforcement is significant. And what leaps out to me is that this is the kind of Hindutva revolution having taken that wicked turn, very similar to places like Iran, where no one is so suspect as someone who's your own, who has certain freedoms or rights and can speak in certain ways that you can't fully control. Now, this is a government that has fully intimidated Indian citizens. It's shown Indian citizens time and time again what it can do to them. There was this loophole. There were people like perhaps Siddharth Vardarajan, who was for all practical purposes Indian, but was run like, as I was. I'd grown up in India. I'd grown up as, it never even occurred to me that I had this other document or whatever. My British passport was really something on the side. And I guess that it allowed you certain freedoms. I guess it made you a foreign national. But, you know, if there had ever been a question for me, choose your British passport or choose your Indian passport, at that point, I would have 100% taken an Indian passport, because there was no question of my living away from my mother, working outside India. Things may be different now, but that to me was the key component. And more, I feel like this is a country that is starting to equate belonging with its ability to intimidate you. With it doesn't mean rights and freedoms. It means like, can it come after you? And they have been very like troubled by the figure of certain people who know India and are able to write abroad about India. And I think that this is one more step in a kind of escalation.
Okay, Karuna Nandi, well-known lawyer, is also joining us. Hi, Karuna. But Atish, let me just push back a little bit on what you've said.
Sure.
To me, it seems that India does not have dual citizenship. And by putting the nomenclature of foreign nationals on overseas citizens, it's making that clear, that even if there was going to be a tinkering with the idea of dual citizenship, that is gone. Yeah. But there are many countries in the world that don't have or don't allow dual citizenship, right? What leaps out at you about these guidelines that I must again stress that the government is insisting are old guidelines from the 90s, including the restriction, by the way, on This is what the government is arguing on missionary and tablighi activities. So what in particular disturbs you?
Well, as you said, these guidelines were there, and we can use our own discrimination to say that they probably will not come after people doing mountaineering as severely as they will come after people doing journalism. So we can use our own discrimination there. But to your other point, there's a loophole. You have a massive Indian diaspora that is connected to India, that has an enormous amount of influence, that has an enormous amount of affection for India. You need to find a realistic way for this diaspora to be connected and to feel like part of the Indian enterprise. And I thought the OCI was that. I thought that you were heading towards something like that. It was a very, very elegant, good solution. What it has turned out to be, and you'll see that at the bottom of this guidelines, they're like, this is not citizenship. This is a visa. And so suddenly that aspect, the government wants to take with one hand and sort of give with the other, which is to say that, of course, they want the diaspora. The diaspora was essential for Mr. Modi to be elected. It played a huge part. But at the same time, they want to be able to control the diaspora. And I think that, yeah.
So one of the sentences that you said is interesting. It's not citizenship, it's a visa. Yeah. And I think that is an interesting distinction, and therefore why call it an OCI card. Let me, before I open this up from a legal point of view, bring in Karuna Nandi. Karuna, as I've been saying, the government has been arguing that many of these restrictions have existed in one way or the other in different notifications through the 90s, in fact, even through the tenure of the previous UPA government. And all that's happened is that they've taken it all together and put it out as one notification. So what's new? So how do we answer what's new?
I think the reason that people are particularly upset is because something that was perhaps missed before. Look, there's a 2000, even what we're looking at now is, mainly a 2019 notification, right? Mm-hmm. But when you have the history of free speech that this government has, coupled with the fact that foreigners don't have the constitutional right to free speech here, which is, of course, the argument that they will make, right?
Yeah, yeah.
The Article 19 right is only available to Indians.
Yes.
The argument they will make is that, look, you don't have the right to free speech, so you don't have the right to challenge this. However, there have been, quite interestingly, two very recent judgments. 2019, there's one in 2019, there's Indability Creative, but there's also a couple of judgments from the Delhi High Court saying that, look, you may not, and one was in the case of a missionary, saying that he could not be denied the OCI visa on the grounds that he did not have the right to free speech. Right?
Right.
Because he did have the right to propagate his religion. He did have the right to Article 14. He did have the right to due process. So when you have a regime that has been particularly draconian on free speech in general, but also free speech, Indian citizens' right to know, and that is an Article 19 right, what foreign reporters are saying, then when this regime clearly says that, which was perhaps missed before, when this regime clearly says that we are going to give special permits to some people and not to others, then huge apprehensions of content-based restrictions.
So are you saying that these notifications existed in some loose, haphazard, but unexecuted way, and because of the track record of this particular government, you're objecting to it, and so if it were another government, you may not?
I'm saying that if you have a law that is never used, so for example, there's anti-speech law, there's section 298 of the Indian Penal Code, and what it says is that if you use a sound, if you utter a sound that offends a religion, then you can go to jail. Yeah. So what does that mean? If I say, moo to a Hindu or oink to a Muslim, or who knows what people are offended by, right? Does that mean that there can be criminal law boo to a goose? Does that mean that there can be criminal sanction against me? No, but it's not used. So I mean, I think there's a challenge by Subramaniam Swamy actually pending in the Supreme Court, which includes 298. But mostly people ignore it. So of course, if there's a law that's like an appendix, a vestigial organ, nobody cares. But if the law under a government that's very efficient in this regard, but particularly inefficient when it comes to the economy and other issues, but very efficient in terms of suppressing free speech, then of course the people have a right to be concerned.
Okay, of course, the case that you gave an example of, just for the perspective of our audience, dealt with a doctor who had an OCI card, and that card was revoked because he was serving as a doctor, but also working with a proselytizing sort of missionary group. And I think that's the case, Karuna, that you've actually referred to.
Actually, the one that I read, Dr.
Okay, but
Christo Thomas Phillips case, which is the one. Yeah, that's the one.
That's the
one that we should really look at. Yeah.
And then the High Court actually said that it was not illegal what he's doing, right? That's the point you're
the High Court said you can't not give him an OCI card, and he has an Article 14 right, and he has a right to come and proselytize if he wishes.
I think that's where the debate in a way narrows down to, that are we extending the fundamental rights to overseas citizens, and if we're not, then as
they have fundamental rights. They only don't have a right to free speech. They actually already very explicitly, foreigners have the right to Article 14 right, for example,
Right. So it's in particular Article 19 that we're talking about. All right. Let me bring in Ujjwal, Deepak, and General Katoch now, and then I'll come to you, Girish, and Suhasini. I think we lost her, but I'm sure she'll reconnect. Ujjwal, as a public policy analyst, do you see any merit in why this particular fundamental right, which is free speech, also the right to propagate religion? I think those are the two rights that we are taking away from overseas citizen card holders. What would be the logic? What would the government be thinking, and why this timing? Ujjwal.
Good evening, all. First of all, thank you, Barkha. And I think it's a great issue in here, and I welcome all the participants here. Barkha, first of all, do we see a level of vindictiveness when people talk about any policy decision being made in India these days? Is it all about Hindutva? Is it all about Modi? Is it all about that RSS cadre and people? So may it be 370, the Ram Mandir case, CA, whatever. I mean, why do we bring in all these things together of any policy decision made by the government? So somebody who studied public policy, I would like to quote you, to the panelists. So it is a democratically elected government. It has the rights to frame policies, make laws which suits the interests of the country and its citizens. So there have been incidents in the past which probably led the government to bring back some laws which was made by a government which was not pro-Hindutva and anti-Hindutva.
So you're saying everything about Hindutva and Narendra Modi, but explain this law. Explain the rationale and the thinking behind the legal argument you heard that that you're taking away specific fundamental rights.
Not banning anybody from doing anything. It is just moderating things which any country has the right. So I was reading Ashish Tess's article on how I got a green card in America. He went through a lot of processes. We all stand up in queues to get a US visa, rejoice, post on Facebook that, I got a US visa, and we become so happy, and we obey all the laws. We don't throw chewing gum in Singapore. Why not in India? Is there a land of law here? Why can't we just subscribe and obey? And why not? It is just asking for permission to journalists, and I know where this debate is leading towards free expression. If the journalist is doing the right job, he might as well ask for a permission. He'll get it. So simple. You get a visa, you get a license, you get a ration card, you get a car.
That's the problem. Doing the right job.
Yeah.
That's the problem.
Okay, let me bring in Suhasini. Suhasini, the point is that even as journalists, when we travel abroad, of course there are all kinds of restrictions. But I think Atish has the hub of the debate. That what does it mean anymore to be an overseas citizen of India? Is this just a visa? But at the same time, the government would argue that there are all kinds of other rights that have been added on to being an OCI, including the rights to, to quotas that were erstwhile reserved for NRIs. Have we just lost Suhasini? All right, let me just take that to General Katoch. General Katoch, how do you see the debate, sir? Go ahead.
Frankly, Barkha, I've been quite amused at seeing the arguments which have been put forward. Anything happens in India, you make a law, people say Hindutva. Arey bhai sahab, Hindutva mein kya gadbad hai? Anything which happens, Narendra Modi's name comes in, Hindutva's name comes in, right? And then we start saying all freedoms have been abandoned. We are living in an age of total suppression. Come on, I've traveled the country. I travel all across. No freedoms have gone. If anything else, the freedoms have increased. But the amount of angst which some people are showing is simply because they have lost political power. And now we have foreign agencies which are actually getting on board, trying to fix Indian polity, so that a particular type of political dispensation can come in. Now, that is not democracy. Democracy is the will of the people. Come on, get to the elections, fight it out. But on a lighter vein, and I want to talk now about the Tablighi and the missionaries and all that business. You see, today is the International Day of the Women, and I'm so delighted to see two women panelists, and Barkha, you're leading the show. Now, just imagine if we were living in an era where Tablighi Jamaat prevails. I'm afraid we wouldn't have had Barkha Dutt, and I'm afraid we wouldn't have had the other two panelists, and that would have been a very sorry state. That would have been the loss of freedom for 50% of our population without anything, simply because of a particular creed. Number two, I have got my son-in-law who's living abroad for many years in London and then in Singapore. He never chose any citizenship but India's. He didn't want to. And now when people try to say, listen, if I had a choice, you had the choice. You chose. Now, once you choose, for God's sake, stick to your choice. Have loyalty to one country at least. You cannot be disloyal there and disloyal here. It's important.
But can I just ask you one thing? Do you see the OCI card? Do you see the OCI? So do you see the OCI card as a visa or as a kind of citizenship which creates a set of rights vis-a-vis the state? I think it also matters how we see the OCI.
You see, Barkha, the problem is many people utilize facility because India is a democratic country and where all freedoms prevail. Now, people misuse those freedoms for extraneous purposes. You see the Tablighi Jamaat, the way it preaches. Now, what is the hate preaching which it has carried on and the Indian state has kept its eyes closed? You want to split the country further? It's not done. Now, of course,
but the Tablighi Jamaat also exists in India. You may not subscribe to its ideology, but not all of its members are from outside India, right? You may or may not agree with a particular religious.
Why should we get people from outside India to preach religious conversion in India? Is something which I haven't understood.
And I think that's a fair question. I want to take that.
This is our country. If you feel so strongly about your religion, you've got a country, preach it there.
Before I go to
preach it in your own country. You don't have to come here.
I think it's actually a pretty fair question, Karuna.
On this mountaineering, because it has, there were a lot of Twitters as to why mountaineers. You see, a lot of foreign agencies are coming into India, and I'm privy to this fact, right? And they want to go to our border areas, especially on the Himalayan border, right? And there is a set purpose behind it, and they come with all these extraneous things, right? As missionaries, as whatnot. Now, we need to curb those activities. It is a fact. It is existing. We are under threat. And regardless of what people may say, there is no threat. It is only a Hindu philosophy or something prevailing. Come on, get off it. This is the most liberal country in the world, even today.
Okay,
and it has never been more liberal than in the last 7 years. It was illiberal before that in the Congress dispensation, where nothing moved. It was total corruption and total lack of freedom of speech. Now you're living in a democracy.
I think at the hub of your debate, if I were to zoom in into the operative question that you have raised, the operative question is, why should somebody who's not a full Indian citizen be allowed to come to India to propagate a religion? right? Why should that be allowed? And I think, Karuna, before I come to Hasni and Girish ji, just give me 2 minutes. Karuna, if you want to briefly respond to that. Yeah.
Your objection is why should foreigners interfere in the politics of our country?
No, why should they be allowed missionary activities? Missionary in the sense of
why should they
proselytizing activities.
Proselytizing activities? Well, okay, why should they be allowed proselytizing activities? But by the same coin, sir, you will perhaps agree that foreign companies should not be allowed to fund political parties. But they are. The BJP changed the law. Yes, the Congress supported it, but the vast majority of funding in the electoral bonds goes to the Bharatiya Janata Party, firstly. And secondly, it's a complete black box. We don't know how many agribusinesses from the United States fund the ruling party. We don't know where the quid pro quos lie. Do they lie in favor of our citizens, or do they lie elsewhere? Is our environment being sold off and chopped up bit by bit and being given away? We don't know. So let's apply these things across the board. Let's apply our principles across the board in the same way.
Right. Can I know now.
Just 30 seconds.
Okay, 30 seconds, because really the other two have been waiting. Yes.
Let us not get into political funding. It's a completely new debate. It will take us off the course. Let's restrict ourselves to this. I can speak for hours on political funding also.
Okay, but I think the Foreign Contributions Act is supported, as Karuna mentioned, by both the principal ruling and opposition parties, is an important point of contrast when we talk about the foreign hand, so to speak. So Hasni, how do you see this debate, and how do you see the timing of this consolidated notification? Because the government is going on arguing that these rules and regulations have existed since the 90s, as have these restrictions.
You know, Barkha, firstly, I'd like to say, and honestly, to hear General Katoch is disturbing, because he's trying to make this into a communal debate. But the truth is that the part of the new notifications on missionaries—
Don't put words in my mouth. No.
Are almost a red herring. I mean, that is not what I think the debate is about. Look at the categories that now an OCI can no longer hold his OCI or no longer have a lifelong visa for India, his or her, that have been notified by the government. So you have research, you have journalistic practices, you have internship or employment in any foreign mission or in any foreign company in India. And you can't visit any places that are not allowed to non-Indian citizens. So actually, the crux of this is the desire of the government to stop research work. Journalists, the fact is that we talk about our pride in Indian diaspora and say how proud we are that prominent journalists around the world are of Indian origin, that the New York Times or Washington Post or others actually post journalists over here. And instead, this notification is essentially saying none of this diaspora can continue to hold their OCIs if they take part in any.
So Asli has a bad connection. We'll wait for her to rejoin. Girish Chandorkar, you have been raising this in a major way in Goa. Why is that?
See, this, first of all, thank you, Barkha, for taking up this very key issue. See, we see this as an attack on minorities. The BJP government is trying to implement BJP RSS agenda slowly. Secondly, this government is talking about the nationalism, patriotism, and while this notification has been brought, they have equated our Indians who has not sacrificed the citizenship like others. Equating them with the foreigners is the first most objection, because these Indians have been working abroad.
Yeah.
They left.
But that's NRI. You can be an NRI without being an OCI, right? I think you're mixing up the two categories.
No, exactly. What I'm trying to say is there are many people who have sacrificed Indian citizenship. And these are the OCIs are the people who have maintaining the
you're
Indian
saying,
citizenship.
you're saying that they should not be called foreign nationals. You're objecting to that.
My immediate objection is you have insulted them, you are humiliating them, and you are equating them to those people who have sacrificed the Indian citizenship for a betterment.
Okay.
How you can equate our Indian nationals who are still wants to be Indians, who are contributing a lot by sacrificing.
Okay, let me get Ujjwal. Let me get Ujjwal in. Let me get Ujjwal in. Ujjwal, go ahead.
What would you like to comment on?
What is the specific reason that you would support these guidelines?
These are merely guidelines, and it is not restricting or banning anybody from doing anything. You simply have to ask for a mere permission. If you're doing your job properly, why not? And I'd like to answer to Suhasini's comment on Professor General Dhruv Katoch. It was Atish who brought in Hindutva and Modi into the discussion, and not General Dhruv Katoch. So you are making it communal. I mean, every time there is a panel discussion, there is a communal angle to this. Either it is Islamophobic or Hinduphobic. And why so? It is not a communal discussion at all. And I fail to understand that.
I'm just going to let Suhasini's back.
See, India is one of the few countries where freedom of expression has been placed in the list of fundamental rights. It is one of the few countries.
Okay.
And we 7 people having this discussion here, candidly, on an open platform, which will not be banned by YouTube or Twitter, shows that we all have
by the way, there are new guidelines for digital content in India that are very contentious, and we can have a separate program on that, Ujjwal. But I want to let Suhasini complete her point, and then I know Atish was wanting to come in. Suhasini, hoping you have a more stable line now. Go ahead, please. Yeah.
And I apologize for that disturbance. So the point I'm trying to make is, if you hear the language of this particular notification, you can already see the difference in the government's language from just a few years ago. When Prime Minister Modi used to travel abroad, he used to speak about the Indian diaspora as the great pride of India. Clearly, in these years, the government is beginning to find that the great pride of India that they had in the diaspora also comes as a double-edged sword. So they are now diaspora members who are taking part in protests about Indian laws. That's not something the government likes. There are members of the diaspora that have gone to court, as Karuna was pointing out, against the government's guidelines, against the government's decision to pull OCIs at will. There was this very famous case in Bihar, of course, of a doctor who was practicing, whose OCI was taken back. And then there are people of Indian origin who are writing articles that are critical of the government that clearly they don't like. That is what has necessitated these new rules that basically say you cannot do research, you cannot be a journalist, you cannot take internship in a foreign mission, you cannot represent, you cannot be part of a foreign company in India without taking special...
I'm sorry, it does not say cannot. It never says cannot. It says you have to inform or ask.
Let me finish. So that's exactly what I'm saying. So without taking special...
You cannot drive a car in America without a driving license.
That at any
you have to apply for a driving license, and if the government feels...
Okay, Ujjwal, let her finish. Ujjwal, you can respond after she finishes, please. Thank you. Let her finish her point. You can respond after that. So, Asni, please go ahead.
Here, the intention is that the government can, as they did in Atish's case, the government can, at the time of their choosing, pull the OCI, which is obviously a huge loss for the member of the diaspora, because they all have families in India. This is an OCI that was given to them since 2005. They have gotten used to the idea that they feel like India is a second home, that they can come and go. So I'd like to really know why a government that has spoken so much about making it easier to call members of the diaspora. I remember Prime Minister Modi in Houston told Donald Trump that, let me introduce you to my family. So why are these new regulations against what the Prime Minister of India called his family abroad being put in place now?
Okay, let me bring in Atish right away. Atish, go ahead.
I just want to respond. Like the general kind of made a good point. The vociferousness, this kind of conspiracy theory. Oh, you chose. Why don't you choose this? This is the rhetoric of a primitive country. Iran, Russia. This is how they look at foreigners. A big-hearted, confident country is very happy to have overlap. You're of Indian origin, you become an American, fantastic. You bring a richness to the country, you bring wealth to the country. Please come and go from that country, enjoy our freedoms. We're not trying to restrict you. When you're getting into this, why did you choose? You're really like, actually, he's elucidating what's at the heart of this, which is the fact that this is happening in a background where Mr. Modi's name is mud. The name of his government abroad is mud. I have been privy to active attempts from the government to try to control what foreign publications write about this government. So all of this is like, we have a very clear background, and now we have a way where there's a certain kind of person who was writing freely, and they're going to be super scared now. I mean, if we see an attack on the wire, which we have already seen, we know what the motivations of this government like perhaps might be.
So are you saying that if you're not a fan or an admirer of the Modi government and you're an OCI card holder, the consequences could be that you're looking over your shoulder because you don't want your card taken away?
Absolutely. I have been privy to somebody from the Indian government coming into the offices of Time and very clearly saying, you must get somebody who knows India, who loves India, get them to write about it, basically to say, why don't you get someone who's uncritical of the government?
And what's wrong is that?
Because it's not your position to choose somebody who's uncritical of the government.
We all do public relations. There's a department called Department of Public Relations.
It's super.
Whose job is to give advertisement and write good things about India.
No, that is not the way a liberal democracy behaves. You don't find somebody from the British government showing up.
Not really.
It's rubbish.
There's a Department of Public Relations which does this job. They go to New York Times, they go Time, and they fail.
I mean, I would put it like this.
All I've been reading about in NYT and Time is anti-India campaign.
Well, let me tell you something. If this was so normal, then why would the editor at Time be so embarrassed? He said, we have been a publication for over 100 years, and not since the Soviets have we had somebody come in and be so heavy-handed and want to try to control the coverage of the country. This is a paranoid, vindictive government.
No, nobody can control.
Okay, everybody knows that.
But we can pitch in. We can definitely try.
Hang on. Ujjwal, here's what I would say. I would say a political party is entitled, or a government. Every government would try and get good press for itself. That's the nature of politics. But institutional democracy and institutional freedoms mean that even those who criticize the government should have that space without it taking away any of their rights, right? So for a government to want good press is what governments all over the world do. But to punish people who don't give it good press is not what democracies do. I think that much we can agree on, right?
But why do you think that bad praise and criticism is only right journalism? No, it's not like that. Journalism is all about, journalism is many more things, right? All we read in the foreign media, and I've been there 1 year, I mean, I was at New York, and I wrote one piece about how Naya Kashmir is developing after 370. Nobody published it. I didn't get a response. And why so? All you got was people writing against India, against 370, against Kashmir. There has to be an aspect. There are some people who are liking 370. Why not?
Have you not read multiple articles praising the vaccination program right now? It's in the nature of news that 17 planes taking off successfully from Heathrow is not news. The idea of writing, of intellectual thought, of inquiry is criticism.
Did you write one about that and about Modi?
Let's cut this out. Okay, Atesh and Ujjwal, let's calm down and come back on the issue. The issue is, should a country ask its overseas citizens, as India is now asking, to seek prior permission for the following activities: proselytizing religious activities, journalism and research, interning in a consulate, and mountaineering. Mountaineering has been explained by General Katoj. So Hasni, let me argue this briefly from the other side, right? Let me just try and see the other side. One, that the government, I have to keep saying this, that the government says that this restriction on these missionary and tablighi activities has existed since the 90s. Karuna also pointed out that it's a 2019 notification. So we just have to keep underlining that this is not a new notification that has come from this government. The second is, are we as a country comfortable saying that you can be an OCI card holder, a citizen of another country, and you come into India and you propagate religion in a proselytizing manner? Are we comfortable with that? So Hasni.
I'm not sure what you mean, Barkha. Why would anyone? I mean, there are anti-conversion.
I'm saying from a point of view of a
inside
government.
the
When I say are we, I don't mean we, the 6 people here. I'm saying what is the government thinking according to you? Because all governments have thought this because these restrictions have existed for many years. That's the point I'm in.
As I said, Barkha, I think you are raising a red herring here. The laws against conversion, against giving people incentives to convert, are very clear in India. So to say that the Tabligis are being told to register separately and missionaries are being told to register separately is just in order to make it very clear where this government really seeks to put more pressure. And you know, we can keep debating which sect of which religion is the problem or not the problem. As I said, I think we need to focus a lot more seriously on what has happened between the relationship between this government and the OCIs, between this government and the diaspora. A government that came in saying that they were in fact going to give the diaspora more space in India. There was even talk about, you know, dual citizenships. There's been talk about voting rights. All the rest, all of that has now been put aside. And the question is, why is that? And I think we really do need to ask, because Mr. Modi in rally after rally around the world, and I've covered several of those rallies, really promised that the diaspora would be given something special. The first thing they did was to merge the PIO and the OCI. It was said in 2016 that this was being done in order to simplify things for people of Indian origin around the world. In fact, what we're seeing is more rules are being put, more regulations are being put on them. And my last point is really that if we are going to talk about the diaspora and you know, people of Indian origin with pride on one hand, then we can't say we have great pride in what you are doing in other countries, but I'm sorry, you cannot do those things when you come to India. So I think
that's a very fair point. Yeah. I think that's a fair point, that when Swati Mohan, you know, has a successful NASA mission, we want to own her as part Indian. When Kamala Harris is, you know, vice president, we want her biracial dimension to be spoken of as at least half Indian. And you can't pick and choose this. But Karuna, you know, it's time to take last comments. But to Suhasini's point, that the restrictions on the Tablighi and the missionary activities, the red herring, the real thing we should be focusing on is the restrictions on journalism and research, and that needing prior permission. Do you agree that that is the central focus here? Do you agree that that should be the central focus?
I think there should be a central focus on it all, because by these notifications, what the government is now emphasizing is the limitation of knowledge, right? This is very serious. So you can't have people who are not Indian citizens researching in India unless they're along the lines that the government likes. I don't want to let this propagation of religion point go, because let us not, even in our own imagination under attack, step away from the Constitution of India. Article 25 says freedom of conscience and free profession, practice and propagation of religion, subject to public order, morality and health, and to the other provisions of this part, all persons are equally entitled to freedom of conscience and the right freely to profess, practice and propagate religion, right? This is in the Christo Thomas judgment of the Delhi High Court. It is clear from the plain language of Article 25 that all persons, not citizens, persons, are equally entitled to the freedom of conscience and have the right to profess, practice, and propagate religion. Article 25 is not restricted to the citizens of this country, but is available to all persons. So I think it's really important to have the confidence of a country that is the country of Mahatma Gandhi, where all the windows of our house are open and we benefit from the ideas that come from anywhere.
Okay.
And we can reject them if we like.
General Katoch, last word, sir.
Right. I really don't agree with the previous panelist. You see, it doesn't work that way. That's a very idealistic way of putting things, and it just doesn't work. India is the country which has given freedom to everybody, and everybody has come here. This is the only land which has accepted people, all the persecuted people. When the Jews were persecuted, they were welcomed in India. So, you know, and suddenly people have started changing the narrative. Why they have started changing the narrative is they have started losing political power. And because they have lost political power, the influence which they wielded in the previous regimes has gone. And that is hurting them. They are no longer welcome in the corridors of power. And now they suddenly feel, what's happened? India has become an intolerant country. No,
how do you
we are a very tolerant country.
Brief interjection. How do you respond to the argument that you can't selectively claim, when these same people do well outside India, we want to own them as part of our own, but we don't want to give them that sense of belonging when they come here. So, how do you respond to that?
So let us say if there is an overseas Indian who has gone and murdered 1,000 people, do we proudly proclaim him as ours? No. So the question is, we proclaim those people who profess the values of India, right? And the people who are like the preaching of Tablighi Jamaat is not professing the values of India, because had you been a Tablighi Jamaat here, none of the ladies, the beautiful ladies in this panel, none of you would have been here. Now, why don't we think of that?
Why? So there are many Indians who are part of the Tablighi Jamaat. There are many Indians. I think Suhasini is wanting to say something to you. Suhasini, go ahead.
Patronizing and sexist statements on a television show. We don't.
No, it's not a sexist statement.
Beautiful adjectives and all being. Please avoid it.
Right, ma'am. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have called any of you beautiful. I take it back.
You're
not beautiful.
Thank you.
Right?
Next time, treat us as people who think.
The point actually is that there are many members of the Tablighi Jamaat who are Indian. The one point that you are presenting the argument about the Tablighi Jamaat, and it's not about whether we agree with the orthodoxy of the Tablighi Jamaat or not. There are people, in India who are members of the Tablighi Jamaat faith, right? They're not all overseas Indians. General Khatoj, they're not all OCI card holders.
That is exactly my point. Why should you accept it from outsiders? We've got enough problems within ourselves where we need to actually get these things in order to promote a more diverse and pluralistic society amongst all religions. That's what I would say. So
I have to
moving us into a black box. Just like the electoral finance. No research in India, no religious propagation, no journalism out of India. We can only talk to each other, controlled by the government. That's what's going on with all these notifications and regulations coming one after the other. And that, sir, is the problem.
No, ma'am. The problem is you're oversimplifying things. And that is the problem.
Read the notifications. Perhaps you'll agree.
Okay, Ujjwal.
I've read the notifications.
All right, Ujjwal and then Atish. I have to close after that. Ujjwal, go ahead.
I just like to end here by saying that I'm amazed with the hypocrisy, the levels of hypocrisy which people have. The same Time magazine, though, whether it's written by an OCI journalist or a Western journalist, I don't mind that. But the same Time magazine calls an attack on Capitol Hill an attack on democracy. And the same farmer protests the attack on Lal Killa is an act of democracy. So, it is there are vested interests of media, the people in media, the people who come to India just to have negative stories about India and against India. So the government and me have a problem with that. And again, I would like to please, I've been asking one question from everybody here. Who says they cannot practice journalism here? I cannot drive a car in America if I don't have a driving license in America. Please come here. You're most welcome. Apply for it and you'll get that's it.
Okay, Atish Tasi.
Please don't be hypocrite.
Barkha, I want to close on the fact that when I had my situation with the government, people were throwing around a number of factors. Oh, is it this reason? Is it that reason? And literally, like, pinned to my sort of Twitter profile was this fact that I said that really, this is not that everyone who's in my situation, regardless of whether they have a Pakistani parent or any such thing, is being put on notice. And you're going to see that very quickly, they're going to move to the next step. And I think what we're witnessing here is that movement, where they were not interested in me because I had a Pakistani parent. Ram Madhav knew very well that I had a Pakistani parent. What they were interested in was the fact that I had written something that was critical of the government, that had embarrassed the government, and they didn't like the fact that they couldn't really control me very easily. And now they've finally given teeth to the thing that was there, perhaps languishing in the rule books. This finally now has teeth. And I think you're going to see it being used to people against people in my situation, which is a real tragedy for the kind of intellectual diversity that the diaspora has brought to India. And obviously there'll be ramifications in the world abroad. It'll be one more mark against Mr. Modi in this sort of course that has humiliated his government in the second term.
Okay, very strong opinions at both ends of the spectrum. We'll have to leave it there. Gerald Katoch, Atish Tasir, Karuna Nandi, Suhasini Haidar, Ujjwal Deepak, thank you so much. And to our audience, we'll see you tomorrow at the same time. Thank you for tuning in, and catch you with another big story tomorrow. Goodbye. It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.